The Empire Strikes Back, Aliens, Paddington 2. These are some of the most legendary sequels ever made. Sequels always have been and always will be a staple of the entertainment industry. Despite how common they are though, a sequel is still a pretty scary thing to attempt. You have to stay true to the essence of the original, while expanding on the concepts presented in an interesting way. On top of that, audiences are going to expect much more than what they got in the original. They want a grander scale, bigger set pieces, and any and all problems present within the first installment to be fixed. Christopher Nolan had to contend with these issues when making The Dark Knight. After successfully reinventing Batman on the big screen with Batman Begins, he now needed to give audiences more. The allure of Batman Begins was its grounded nature though. If he went too far, he could alienate fans of this new Batman. On the other hand, if he played it too safe, dark and gritty Batman could become a tired concept on only his second outing. So how do you properly up the scale from the grounded noir origin story depicted in Batman Begins? Well, you start by changing the genre. The Dark Knight, more than being a superhero movie, is an epic crime drama on a grand scale. Yet somehow it still follows the established rules and conventions of this universe. This perfect balance led to The Dark Knight garnering one of the most illustrious reputations in film history. It's often lauded as the greatest superhero movie ever made, one of the greatest sequels ever made, and one of the greatest films of all time. It ranks third on the IMDb Top 250 list. It has a 94% in Rotten Tomatoes, and a staggering 4.5 stars on Letterboxd. How did The Dark Knight gain such a reputation, and what effect did it have on the film industry and Nolan's career? Today we'll be finding the answers to those questions, and in the coming months, I'll be diving into each film in Christopher Nolan's stellar filmography. If that sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at Christopher Nolan's magnum opus, The Dark Knight. In the final scene of Batman Begins, a Joker card is shown, teasing the character. This seems to imply that a sequel was planned from the beginning, but this actually wasn't the case. Before Batman Begins' release, both Warner Bros. And Nolan were unsure just how profitable this franchise could be. Following the financial and especially the critical success of Batman Begins, however, Warner Bros. Prioritized a sequel. After Nolan completed production on The Prestige, he got to work on The Dark Knight. Though he and writer David Goyer had considered some ideas for a sequel while making Batman Begins, nothing had actually been decided. In the end, the final scene in Batman Begins did serve as the basis for many concepts present within The Dark Knight. Obviously, the Joker is the primary antagonist, but The Dark Knight also discusses the concept of escalation, which was mentioned in Batman Begins. Over the course of 3 months, Goyer and Nolan were able to iron out the core plot points of what would become The Dark Knight. While Christopher Nolan was still busy with The Prestige, Jonathan Nolan had begun working on a screenplay based on the plot points provided. After 8 months of work on his own, and a further 6 months collaborating with Christopher Nolan, the brothers finally had a completed screenplay. By the end, however, the story was more of an epic crime drama than a superhero movie, and this carried over to the final product. Though the script didn't quite resemble a typical comic book adaptation, it still paid tribute to the source material. A story that had a strong influence on The Dark Knight was The Long Halloween. It not only inspired the tone and atmosphere, but there's also a couple moments that are ripped directly from that story. There is the line, "I believe in Harvey Dent," which is used as Harvey's campaign slogan in the film. There's the meeting between Batman, Gordon, and Dent where they team up to take down the mob, and even the moment when Dent has a gun pulled on him in court bears strong resemblance to the creation of Two-Face in Long Halloween. Seeing as this was a sequel, the casting process shouldn't have been too difficult, but given the roles that needed to be filled, it would prove to be complex. First off, Katie Holmes elected not to return as Rachel Dawes in The Dark Knight, instead choosing to star in Mad Money of all things. In her place, Maggie Gyllenhaal was cast, and she did a great job here. She's easily a better actress than Katie Holmes and far more convincing as Gotham's assistant district attorney. One moment I love is when she's yelling over the phone to Harvey. Throughout this entire scene, she's struggling to speak as she's lost her voice. We're never told exactly how long she's been tied to that chair, but based on this detail, we can assume that it may have been a few hours. This makes the moment even more tragic. Back to the cast though, another important role that had to be filled was that of Gotham's DA, Harvey Dent. Dent was initially meant to appear in Batman Begins in place of Rachel Dawes. It was later decided to replace him, however, as Nolan and Goyer felt that they couldn't do the character justice within Batman Begins' narrative. Clearly, they felt like they were now up to the challenge. Of the actors considered, Matt Damon and Aaron Eckhart are the only two I seriously think could have pulled it off, with Eckhart eventually being cast. Nolan says he wanted someone with an all-American charm and a heroic presence, and Eckhart embodies these traits. On top of these, however, he also portrays the necessary idealism, anger, and underlying darkness. The biggest concern with casting would come with the Joker, though. He would already be an incredibly complex character, but casting was only made more difficult due to Jack Nicholson's performance cementing a certain idea of the character into pop culture. Apparently, Heath Ledger was the only actor seriously considered for the role, but this decision was met with strong backlash. As the story goes, Ledger went on to spend a month alone in a hotel room while studying on the relevant material for the character. He truly gave his all to this performance. He went on to say that at the end of a filming day, he couldn't even move or talk. On top of that, he was only getting around 2 hours of sleep per night due to how committed he was to the role. He even insisted on doing the makeup himself, since that's how the Joker would do it. His passion for this role was clear, and it bleeds through to his performance. It is one of the single greatest performances I've ever seen and has been properly recognized in pop culture. The Dark Knight is an incredible film in its own right, of course, but I'd be lying if I said that its current place as one of the greatest films ever made wasn't at least in part due to Ledger's performance. However, sadly, while The Dark Knight was being edited, in January of 2008, Heath Ledger passed away. I've seen claims that at least some of the praise Ledger receives for this performance was due to his passing. We've seen it with athletes like Kobe Bryant, for example, where following their deaths, their career becomes a hyperbolic, almost mythical entity, and their accomplishments are blown way out of proportion. I don't believe that this was the case with Heath Ledger whatsoever. His passing undoubtedly brought more attention to the movie prior to release. However, he genuinely gave an all-time great performance here, which we'll get more into the specifics of later on. For now, let's talk about the crew. Pretty much everyone returned from Batman Begins, including editor Lee Smith, writer David Goyer, costume designer Lindy Hemming, production designer Nathan Crowley, cinematographer Wally Pfister, and music by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. I complimented the editing on The Prestige, Lee Smith's previous film before The Dark Knight, and that praise carries over to this film. While The Dark Knight is a linear story chronologically, it still comes with its own challenges. Many events take place at the exact same time in different locations. These sequences are flawlessly intercut in a way that builds drama and anticipation while still being easy to follow. One that immediately comes to mind is when Commissioner Loeb, Judge Cirillo, and Harvey Dent are all targeted by the Joker. The tension slowly builds throughout this sequence, with it eventually culminating in Commissioner Loeb and Judge Cirillo's deaths and Joker's arrival at Dent's fundraiser. With the music dying down and Joker walking about the room unchallenged, the tension hovers where it's at, allowing it to build even further into an action sequence. And speaking of action sequences, they are way better in The Dark Knight than they were in Batman Begins. Viewers can actually see what's going on, which is frankly revolutionary for the series. I previously claimed that the editing was at fault in the action sequences for Batman Begins, and that it was likely done that way intentionally in order to mask some sort of issue. And it seems that the issue may have been the suit used in that movie. It was clunky and stiff, to the point that Christian Bale couldn't even turn his head. This new suit, with its sleeker design, allowed for more dynamic action sequences, which meant that Lee Smith didn't have to cut to a different shot several times per second. Speaking of the suit, I love how an in-universe explanation was given for this new suit. Since this universe is so grounded in reality, it seems appropriate to offer an explanation for such a massive change. Rather than simply showing up in a new suit and leaving audiences to speculate, the opening action sequence is done in the Batman Begins suit, with Bruce then noticing a weakness and commissioning Lucius Fox to make him a new one. And again, this story is meant to be as realistic as possible, so this new suit isn't just a straight upgrade. He's simply trading durability for maneuverability. And while we're on the topic of Batman suits, I never really loved the Batman Begins suit. I mean, I do think it looks good. The cape coming so far forward and the wide neck made for a strong silhouette. However, those stylistic choices lack the functionality seen in every other aspect of the production design. The Dark Knight suit, on the other hand, synergizes with the established tone and sensibilities of this universe. The sleek design is far more functional and also allows for a wider range of expression when in the suit. In Batman Begins, it was hard to take conversations seriously when Batman was in costume, as Christian Bale just looked uncomfortable. The Dark Knight suit is far more reasonable in this manner, and makes moments like the interrogation scene far better than they would have been otherwise. I also usually don't shout out costume designers, mostly because I forget, but I definitely have to mention Lindy Hemming here, as she designed both of the aforementioned suits. Nathan Crowley also returned as production designer from Batman Begins. Of course, most of the heavy lifting in regard to production design was already accomplished when working on the first film, but there was still work to be done for The Dark Knight. Firstly, following the destruction of the Narrows, Gotham took on a more traditional urban aesthetic. And while I feel that the city of Gotham had more to offer in Batman Begins, the conventional urban environment of The Dark Knight fits the tone of the narrative. Also, since the story takes place only a year after the events of Batman Begins, Wayne Manor still isn't rebuilt yet. This required a new home to be made for both Bruce Wayne and Batman. For Bruce Wayne, he got a spacious penthouse that reflects just how empty that side of his life is. As Rachel says, Bruce has made her his one hope for a normal life and has let go of anything that isn't related to his work as Batman. This is also reflected in the scene following the opening sequence, where Alfred finds Bruce in his bunker rather than his penthouse. Speaking of the bunker, I absolutely love the design here. It's industrial, functional, and modern, exactly what I'd expect from this iteration of Batman. And this excellent production design was once again captured by cinematographer Wally Pfister, and it goes without saying that he did a fantastic job once again. I love the use of the color blue throughout the story, contrasting the orange from the previous film. These cooler tones lend themselves to the narrative and create a distinct atmosphere from the other entries in this trilogy. The cinematography in The Dark Knight is also notable because it was the first major motion picture to use IMAX cameras, something that has become a staple in Nolan's career and cinema as a whole. IMAX shots only account for about 28 minutes of the film's total runtime, but they're used to great effect, especially in the opening sequence, where they're used to immediately set the tone that this story is set on a much larger scale than Batman Begins was. Aiding in creating the atmosphere of an epic is the soundtrack. The Dark Knight is a story about chaos. In this chaos is constant rising and falling tension, which is accurately captured and enhanced by the soundtrack. A particular favorite of mine is the track Why So Serious, which expands upon Heath Ledger's already dynamic performance. Christopher Nolan and Christian Bale have both said that Batman is often overshadowed by his villains. They made it a point in Batman Begins to make sure this wasn't the case. They wanted Bruce Wayne's story to be front and center. With the character having an entire film to be firmly established, however, now is the time for someone else to steal the show, and that's exactly what Heath Ledger's Joker did. His performance is chaotic and dynamic. You never know what he's going to do or say next. He's sociopathic and maniacal, and yet he still occasionally says things the audience can't help but laugh at. Heath Ledger had originally met with Nolan during pre-production of Batman Begins for the role of Batman. Ledger felt the part wasn't right for him though. When it came time to find the right Joker, however, Ledger actually sought the part out, and before the script was even completed, Ledger had gotten the part. Joker in The Dark Knight is more of a primal force of nature than a character. He has no origin, no name, he doesn't even have a match on his fingerprints. There is no attempt to humanize him whatsoever. He doesn't have a goal or motivation. In what's essentially his character introduction, his conversation with the mob, it seems that he wants money and he wants to kill Batman. As we see later on though, he clearly doesn't care for money and he doesn't want to kill Batman. There is no consistency to him at all. He claims to be a man of his word in one scene, and then goes on to lie when telling Batman the addresses of where Harvey and Rachel are. He has no rules. It's as he says, he's simply an agent of chaos. And this makes for a terrifying villain and foil to Batman. Batman wants nothing more than to establish order and justice in Gotham, to give the people something to believe in and aspire to. And this is where the concept of escalation comes in. Joker says it himself.
This town deserves a better class of criminal, and I'm gonna give it to him.
It's only natural that when an unfailing good rises, or an immovable object if you will, an unstoppable force must rise up to combat it. The previous criminals weren't cutting it, so a primal force was sent to balance the scales. Joker pushes Batman to his absolute limit and consistently makes him question these rules he lives by. The Dark Knight is largely built by sequences and set pieces that push our protagonist further and further. The narrative structure actually reflects The Long Halloween pretty well. With our protagonist focused on a different goal, a serial killer is unleashed who ends up massively upsetting the established order. Each issue, or sequence in the film's case, focuses on a different murder that tests the protagonist in a new way. And each is worthy of serving as the climax in any other story, with the grandiose set pieces and philosophical implications. Initially, while the Joker slowly garners a reputation, he's ignored by both the protagonist and antagonist. They're wrapped up in their own conflict until Chaos Incarnate comes along to shake things up. The first sequence is the murder of Commissioner Loeb and Judge Cirillo. I previously praised the music and editing in this sequence, and those are definitely highlights, but really everything about this is perfect. It marks the first time the Joker and Batman meet face to face, the action sequence is solid, and the murder calls into question how trustworthy the men in Gordon's unit are. And these murders, alongside the assassination attempt on the mayor, prove Joker's point that he makes to Harvey later in the film. While yes, the Joker's thinking is flawed, there is an element of truth in terms of the societal imbalance as to the value of a human life. If a truckload of soldiers dies, no one bats an eye, but a threat is made to the mayor and the whole city is on high alert. The difference, of course, is the rank or status and the plan that we have for these people. As a society, we expect soldiers to die, so it comes as no surprise. But a human life is a human life. That's the attraction of chaos. It's unruly and seemingly fair. It ignores status and rank and impartially destroys everything in its path. With all that established, we can now discuss the best stretch of the narrative and some of the best scenes ever put to film. The interrogation scene is incredible, and it's between two of the best sequences in the story. The first being Harvey Dent's arrest, and the second being Rachel's murder. Individually, each would be the best moment in any other superhero movie, but they're back to back here. From the 1 hour 13 minute mark to the 1 hour 40 minute mark, The Dark Knight is the definition of peak fiction. The sequence leading to the Joker's capture is frantic and has some of the best action in the film, especially when seen in IMAX. Also, I just have to throw in how cool the Bat-Pod is. Yet another excellent design by Nathan Crowley. Anyway, after the twist that Gordon is still alive following the assassination attempt on the mayor, which is an impressive bit of storytelling in its own right, we finally get a triumph on behalf of our heroes. Since they set out to work together on that rooftop early in the story, they haven't won much. But finally, they seem closer to their goal, and it took the efforts of all three men. And this is why the interrogation scene hits as hard as it needed to. As always, it's revealed that the Joker was one step ahead, and that Harvey Dent never made it home. When a film reaches classic status like The Dark Knight has, moments that rely on shock value lose weight as time goes on, and this is one of those moments. I cannot overstate how cool this was to me as a kid. Suddenly Batman just appears behind Joker and slams his head into a table. It's completely unexpected and an incredible way to start a scene. And this is the moment where Batman and the Joker's differing philosophies finally go head to head. Joker exists in a world without rules, which allows him to consistently be one step ahead. His entire goal in this narrative is just to combat the Batman in any way possible, and since getting him to unmask by threatening him with the lives of civilians didn't work, he instead attacks his ideals or rules. He puts Batman in an impossible scenario by essentially forcing him to kill. Consciously making the choice not to save someone is effectively murder, so he forces Batman to make a choice as to who he will save. Also, this philosophy kinda calls into question the ending to Batman Begins, since he just let Ra's al Ghul die, which by this metric was murder. And I just noticed this detail on my most recent viewing. It was probably incredibly obvious to everyone else, but Batman slamming the Joker's head into the glass is actually what allowed Joker to escape, since it sent shards of glass everywhere, and Joker used one of these shards of glass to hold the police officer hostage. It just further goes to show how every move our protagonists make seems to just play into the Joker's hands. This whole sequence is extremely tense. The interrogation quickly turns into a frantic race against the clock in order to save both Harvey and Rachel. Seeing as this is a superhero story though, and since we're only halfway through this narrative, obviously Batman will find a way to save both Harvey Dent and Rachel. Though the situation may seem impossible, it is in the nature of superheroes to accomplish the impossible.
Harvey, it's okay. It's alright, listen. Someone...
A major plot element of The Dark Knight is the dichotomy between Harvey Dent and the Batman. They are mostly similar, to the point that many in Gotham believe them to be one and the same. However, they differ in how far they're willing to go. Batman refuses to break his rules for anything. However, Harvey Dent's idealized sense of justice shatters when put under test. Rachel's death was obviously unexpected in-universe, but even as an audience, it seemingly comes out of nowhere. In hindsight, her heartfelt goodbye to Alfred seems to suggest such a fate, but it still wasn't obvious. She is meant to be the typical damsel in distress who is rescued just in the nick of time. And in terms of drama, she still had much more to offer this story. Her choice between Bruce and Harvey still held weight for the audience and could have been worked in a myriad of ways. But just as in reality, however, death doesn't wait for all the plot lines to neatly be tied up. And this adds to the tragedy of her death. It's unfair, which is exactly why the impartiality of chaos attracts Harvey. Since chaos isn't targeted, it is fair. So on his revenge tour, Harvey decides to leave everything to chance. Harvey was targeted because of his idealism and goodness. He was the best of our protagonists morally. He was the lawful good of the group in a sense. While Gordon relied on cops he knew were crooked, and Batman doesn't hesitate to resort to torture, Dent up to this point had done everything by the book. But as we saw when he tortured one of Joker's henchmen, he had a darkness inside of him that motivated him to do whatever it takes for the sake of justice. The Joker targeted this darkness and aimed to plunge Gotham into absolute anarchy by inverting the moral core of the city. And I think the sequence with Coleman Reese establishes just how necessary Dent is to Gotham. Reese claims to know the Batman's true identity. That information being revealed would ruin Joker's game though, so he sets up a challenge. If Coleman Reese isn't dead within the next hour, Joker will blow up a hospital. Obviously, this is a threat that affects a lot of people. Not only those in a hospital, but also those with family in the hospital. By not specifying the hospital either, chaos only spreads. It's just as Joker promised during the interrogation scene.
I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
They all quickly turn on Coleman Reese. The whole city is suddenly after one man. This sequence serves as an example of what Gotham would be like without Dent's guiding influence. With Dent out of commission, the people immediately begin to pursue their own ideas of justice, with Coleman Reese specifically stating that revealing the Batman's identity is what Harvey would want, despite him refusing to do that very thing earlier. This establishes just how badly Gotham needs Harvey Dent, or at least the idea of him. And while this sequence seems to prove that Gotham may be beyond saving, as we later see, this isn't the case. The third act of The Dark Knight is full of the expected grand action sequence and exciting stunts, but at its core is a moral dilemma so provocative that it will likely stay with viewers long after the film's conclusion. The ferry problem is simple at its core. One ferry is full of innocent civilians, while the other is full of prisoners. If either ferry elects to blow up the other, they get to live. If neither can decide, however, they both die. It can be troubling to consider what we each as individuals would do in such a situation. While we can believe that we'd react in an honorable way, there really is no way to know for sure. In this moment, Gotham proved that it wasn't beyond saving though. There were good people left in the city. There are even good people found amongst the city's prisons. Clearly there is hope for the Batman's mission. One aspect of this sequence that I think flies under the radar though is Batman's unflinching confidence in the people of Gotham. He never once doubts that neither ferry will elect to destroy the other. Instead, he focuses on the task at hand and leaves the city's fate in its own hands. Despite this optimism, Joker's plan aims to turn the entire city in on itself. Batman is a relatively static character throughout The Dark Knight. We were familiarized with the many facets of Bruce Wayne all throughout Batman Begins, so spending time rehashing that material would have been a waste. Despite this, he still has an arc throughout this story. When initially tested by Joker, he can't endure. As Carmine Falcone said in Batman Begins, Bruce will always fear what he doesn't understand. And as Alfred says, Bruce does not understand the Joker. He thought he had conquered all of his fears as he came to know everything he would have to defeat. But when presented with something unknowable, that insecurity returns. Insecurity in his tactics, his mission, and his righteousness. He's pushed to the point of turning himself in when he simply can't endure any longer. Alfred tries to help him realize this is exactly what the Batman is for, but Bruce doesn't understand in this moment. The Batman isn't a hero, he's an incorruptible symbol. He has no limits and can become whatever Gotham requires, even if it means being hated by the very city he's sworn to protect. This lesson is finally learned by Bruce in the closing moments of the narrative. The Batman shoulders an incredible burden, one that no man can carry. He absolves Harvey Dent of his crimes by taking on the guilt, saving Gotham's soul in the process, and finally paving the way for peace in the city. This ending sequence never fails to give me chills. Gordon's monologue is delivered astoundingly well and is triumphant yet melancholy, as if weighing the cost of these events all throughout his speech, and it leads to the single greatest roll credits moment in film history in my eyes. While Bruce has technically accomplished his goal by the end of the story, that of saving his city and finally hanging up the cape, the toll that it took on our protagonist is evident. He is also left weighing the cost. While the war was won, he paid an intense price. The only hope Bruce had for a normal life seemingly died with Rachel, and with Batman being no more, he has nothing left. And as with anything built on a lie, the peace in Gotham is fragile. This ending is far more tragic than I think people give it credit for. The Dark Knight is one of those tragedies like Whiplash or Star Wars Episode 3, where I can't help but wish for a different ending upon each rewatch, hoping the characters don't make those seemingly inconsequential decisions that lead to the absolute tragedy. This dread aids each rewatch, alongside the ever-entertaining performances, dialogue, and action sequences. The Dark Knight is up there as one of my most rewatched films. It's just perfect. It's also one of the most quotable movies I've ever seen. I mean, just the other day I watched this movie with some friends and we would just quote every one of Joker's lines. I think a big reason why The Dark Knight holds such a special place in my heart is because of how popular it is. My whole life I've had nerdier interests, video games, anime, comic books. The Dark Knight was one of the only things that I really enjoyed that I could share with everyone. The near universal praise it received gave me a go-to option when discussing my interests with people. While Batman Begins started the revolution, The Dark Knight kicked the door open. For the first time, superheroes weren't just mainstream, they were actually kinda cool. To have a film of this high quality, with this many eyes on it, in this genre, seemed like an impossibility, but Christopher Nolan made it happen. At every turn during the production of The Dark Knight, Nolan sought the opportunity to be revolutionary, even down to his insistence on using IMAX cameras. Will a superhero movie that's better than The Dark Knight ever be made? Maybe. It's unlikely, but that possibility can't be ruled out. However, I don't think the superhero genre will ever receive a title as revolutionary as The Dark Knight again. The level of quality, the talent, and the passion behind it will never be matched. That's why I can confidently say that there will never be another film like The Dark Knight. That's not to say that people haven't tried though. In fact, Nolan himself tried only 4 years later with The Dark Knight's sequel, The Dark Knight Rises. Before working on that film though, he made Inception, yet another of one of the most critically acclaimed movies ever made. The 4-film run Christopher Nolan was on at this point is unreal in hindsight. From Batman Begins to The Prestige to The Dark Knight to Inception. If there ever was a film that most often challenged Dark Knight's place as Nolan's magnum opus, however, it would likely be Inception. So that's what we'll be taking a look at next time. If that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more content like this.